This is where humanity needs to head. All right, we want to gain this control against religion and against any kind of belief in the supernatural. But if you no longer have the Christian standard, you can't say this is right or this is wrong. You can say, well, that was right for them, but it's not right for me.
If you approach an atheist and you want to share the gospel, how do you normally share the gospel with them? Hey everyone, hopefully you're doing well. Welcome to the Jesus King podcast.
Traditional fist bump.
How you doing, Abe?
I'm good. How are you, man?
Good, man. We're actually speaking about atheism today. And atheism has actually taken many forms in the past throughout history.
Like a chameleon.
Like a chameleon, right?
Yeah.
So just recently, the last, say, 100 or 200 years, it's been taking the shape of, you know, we're more science-based, right? If you're in love with the reality, if you're in love with science and nature and what it provides you, then the truth is in atheism.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you are a religious person, then you must be into supernatural, mystic stuff.
Yeah. And it's anti-science.
It is anti-science, right? So you're not being wise, you're not exercising your senses logically, right? You're the type of person that refuses to believe in reality.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You just want to kind of give yourself a purpose, give yourself a hope after death, and so on. Whatever the arguments go for that. So, well, obviously, of that is atheism speaks about that if we get rid of religion, then we can get to our utopia.
And we'll become better as a society.
We will become better. We will become more morally just and right. And we can get something better than, like, say, the Ten Commandments or the moral standards of the Bible. We can improve on that. We can give value to a human being. But let's actually discuss what atheism does in nations past. And how it actually brings us backwards. It doesn't actually bring us forward.
Of course.
And obviously we can discuss a lot of other stuff with atheism and
we'll
Christianity.
touch on that because a lot of like neo-atheists today, what they say is that they're basing atheism on a lot of, Charles Darwin, a lot of on his views. Charles Darwin came up with the theory of evolution, but he actually wasn't an atheist. Right? He actually was a deist, a theist. So he did have a belief in God, but came up with this idea of how God or whatever was out there, how he put into process the creation of the world. I still think it's flawed, but that's not the idea. Atheism, as we see in the current form, was very much influenced by Karl Marx and and Lenin, right? So when these guys came up with the Communist Manifesto and Marxist views, they promoted atheism, the disconnect from any God, that God does not exist, God must die in order for us to push our political viewpoint and push this political utopia that we have in our own mind, that we say, okay, this is where humanity needs to head. All right, we want to gain this control against religion and against any kind of belief in the supernatural so that we can progress our own desires and progress in our own wants and needs and whatnot. And so they saw religion as being the stumbling block to progress, which is very, very historically inaccurate. Because we've seen throughout history that it was Christianity that sparked things like the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment period and the arts and culture and the advance in technology and science. It was actually headed by people who were Christians because they wanted to get to know the world that God made, right? And so we've seen Christianity lead us this far, and then in the last few centuries, we're saying, well, we don't need Christianity anymore. We don't need God anymore. What we need is our own wisdom and our own intelligence, and we can do this on our own. And it's very flawed and it's very dangerous because it's only been a very short time where this has been the case. But then, so like a little bit of, historical nerd stuff, but this kind of happened during World War II, like with the whole war with the Nazis and and with communists, with Joseph Stalin and whatnot. So where communism was having its experimental period in Russia, for example. So Russia was communist, more death toll than basically any other war in any history, and they were atheists, right? And so one of the common arguments for atheists is like, oh well, religion has killed more people than atheism. It's not true at all, right?
Yeah.
You look at
And when you say religion, what do you mean by religion?
yeah,
Because
and
there are
that as well.
religions that promote
Yes,
killing.
yeah. But even if you factor in all the religions in the world, what happened in World War II killed more people through atheism than all of those religions put together.
So it's not your utopia, I guess.
No. And so every experiment with atheism, every experiment as an atheistic society has failed and fallen, right? And a lot of people might take issue with this, but I am going to say it. One of the foundational aspects of the neo and new atheist movement is Marxist and communist by agenda. Because what happened after World War II was they had an influx of Marxist professors and university teachers who came into the United States, Australia, and the Western world and Europe and started teaching in the universities these ideas. So this neo-atheism came from that forefront, from that foundation of that teaching. And so that's kind of like the agenda. It's like we want to get you to this point of cultural Marxism, cultural communism, where God is no longer in viewpoint,
required.
is no longer required, and then we're going to be able to push this agenda and this thing. So like I don't want to be like this alarmist or whatnot or this conspiracy theorist. It's really not. It's a fact of history. This is what was happening, and this is where it's leading. And you can see the trends right now. You can see that right now, because we become a lot more atheistic and we become a lot more naturalistic in our viewpoint, and we're removing God, we're seeing a lot of the fruits of communism coming into our culture and Marxism coming into our culture, and there's such a danger in that. There's such a disconnect, and it's funny because like what you'll have today, you'll have people that say, "Oh well, you know, we're cultural Christians. We want to take from Christianity the good things, but leave the God stuff and the theology stuff out of it. But we want to take the good stuff that we can reap." That can only happen for so long. Right?
Yeah.
You can only take the fruit from the tree for so long after you've, cut down the roots of the tree. It's no longer going to produce that fruit for you. So if they want to cut Christianity completely out and cut God completely out of society and say, we want to remove God completely, you can only take the fruit for so long until something else will rise up and grow.
Yeah, that's a big issue with me is like, let's take the gift, refuse the giver.
Exactly.
And have nothing to do with God. And as you were talking about universities, and I can see a lot of Christian parents have this concern, right? Their kids grow up in a Christian environment, they love the Lord, and they're doing great, and then they hit that university phase.
Yeah.
And you see them coming up not only with atheism, man, with all these crazy ideologies, man.
But the thing is, atheism allows for that.
Yeah, well,
Like,
take away God, you take away
You
morality.
can believe what you want. Yeah.
And that's the issue, like with atheism, is like, wait, you don't have any objective morality.
Mm-hmm.
It's all subjective to you.
Yes.
Whatever you view in your own mind to be right, that's what you're gonna do. And some of the things that you might view in your mind to be right, the reason that you might not do them is because you're scared of the consequences.
Yes,
right?
that's
Society is going to punish you for it.
Yeah.
And that's why if you take away God from the Christianity part, right? As you said, they want to be culturally Christian. You take God away, you're taking a person who's the foundation of the moral standards of Christianity.
Yeah, of course. So then what becomes the moral standard? And this is one of the logical flaws, I would say, and one of the dangers of atheism as well, is the moral standard is then what the culture would deem to be right and wrong. The culture can say anything, right?
Yeah.
Like a culture, like look at Nazi culture. Look at German culture in World War II. What did it say was good? It was good to kill and exterminate the Jews, and to kill and exterminate gypsies, and to kill and exterminate people that didn't adhere to our ideology. It's good to do that, right?
Survival of the fittest kind of thing.
That's it. Stalin did the same thing in Russia. right? It's good to do abhorrent and evil things by the Christian standard. But if you no longer have the Christian standard, you can't say this is right or this is wrong. You can say, well, that was right for them, but it's not right for me. But then I will ask someone who is an atheist, why? Why is it wrong for you? What is it in you that says it's wrong to kill? You have no moral objective standard, even though in their heart they know, because like you see the laws of God instilled in men, and like they're just suppressing that truth.
Yeah.
Like they know it's wrong to rape someone. They know it's wrong to murder someone. They know, like, there's this innate thing, but what happens is you suppress the truth for long enough, you sear your conscience, and you become desensitized to it. You become desensitized to these things. So like in the beginning of the Nazi regime, there were certain people that were very worried about the lean towards exterminating Jews or killing Jews or those issues, but they got desensitized over that period of time. And same thing in communist Russia, they got desensitized to the point they suppressed the truth to the point where this was now normal. This is the right thing to do, and that's the danger that lies. So, if your morality is subject to what the culture has mandated, you're in a lot of trouble, because our future is going to look very different to what Christianity has built in our culture.
Yeah, of course. And that kind of reminds me of Romans chapter 1, like 20 and onwards. It speaks about that, through nature we can actually understand who God is, right?
Yes.
But what did people do? They exchanged the truth for a lie. Instead of worshiping the creator, they started to worship the creation, and they were given to their own desires. And I do see that right now with the theme of science being the driving force of the new atheism, right?
Yeah.
Is the idea, let's focus on the creation. Don't bring this creator person into the equation. Let's not look at creation and understand God. Let's look at creation and try and understand ourselves and just understand creation for what it is. And that's the problem there. I like what John Lennox does, and he does focus a lot on this. He actually speaks about the boom of science, like 16th, 17th century, where you see all these people who were God-believing, God-fearing scientists who explored science because they believed that if creation is full of information, information comes from intelligence, a mind.
That's it.
Right? Like if I write something on the wall, no one's going to come and think, it just happened on its own.
Yeah.
They would think because there's information and it's coherent, there is a mind behind it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So these people looked at the world and they're like, wait, it's kind of looks very complicated, and it is very well put. There must be a mind behind it. So let's explore creation to understand the creator more. And that's what Paul does in Romans chapter 1, is when you look at creation, you understand the attributes of God.
Yes.
The Godhead, his power, his majesty, his glory. But what people did later on, they hijacked science and they said, no.
Yeah. What science says is this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're into science, then you must be a naturalist, right? You must be an atheist. You can't be a theist. You can't believe in God. And that's the difficult part where, unfortunately, the church started to back away from science. And atheism started to take over science more. And now what's happening is, if you're a Christian, you're known to be someone who's anti-science, or so they think, right? Yeah. And if you're an atheist, you must be in love with science.
Yeah, well, like,
but it wasn't like that before.
You said if they've hijacked science and they've made it their own and they've redefined the term, then we're anti-science because the science says there is no God. So therefore we have to be anti-science. That's not science. That's not by definition what science was. And so when we say Christianity and science, they can't cohabitate. They have no connection with one another. You're like, historically, that's wrong, right? Because it was Christians that funded scientific pursuit. It was Christians that funded for all these men to go out and do extraordinary things.
Hospitals, libraries, schools.
Medical science to mathematics, to physics, to engineering, to everything. Every aspect of it was funded by the Christian church in order to understand the world that God made. But then when it was hijacked by, Marxists and communists and atheists saying we want to remove God from the equation completely, science then becomes a mechanism for destruction instead of for
Yeah,
God's glory as
of
well.
course. And I like something that Answers in Genesis do. And this is something that they've kind of opened up my eyes a long time ago. They said there is observable science
Yes.
and there's like a
Theoretical.
historical
Yeah.
science, right? Observable science is what you see in a lab, right? You can repeat it, you can observe it, you can do tests on it.
You can measure it. It's there. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people, when they think of science, that's what they think of, right? And
Experimental science.
experimental, right? And there is this historical worldview science, and this historical worldview science is built on theories, right? It's not something that you can really test in a lab. Like if, for example, someone can say the Earth is 14 billion years ago, right?
Yes.
I'm not for or against it. That's not the conversation. But what observable science says is, well, we haven't been 14 billion years ago. Like, there's no one that was
Yeah, no
there
one is there to actually.
for someone to observe and say,
Yeah.
well, that's a fact. It's just a theory.
Yeah.
Well, and times change, right? It might be 8 billion, 14 billion, you can go 21 billion,
Yeah,
or whatever the case
it's only
is.
it can only be a theory unless someone can actually duplicate it in an experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the idea is, what I like is when they differentiate it, they say with scientific facts, there's no problem with Christianity. It doesn't conflict Christianity. What Christianity is going against is those theories,
Yes.
right? Evolution theory, Big Bang theory. These are theories. Like, I know a lot of people out there are very passionate about it, say, no, it's been proven right, is because we've got
Sorry, guys,
certain
no.
things, right, that kind of indicates for it. Fair enough, you have your argument, but the reality is we haven't proven any of them. And there's a reason why we put the word theory at the end of that statement. Is that the point is, you're saying Christianity is wrong, but you're trying to prove Christianity is wrong with theories
Yes.
instead of trying to prove Christianity wrong with facts.
Yes.
And that's why we were talking about historical science. Is the reality is that Christians and people who believed in God did come and advance this because they believed in a creator.
Yes. Yeah.
But when these theories came, those theories didn't come to advance science. They came to take away God away from science.
And also, what that does, it turns science into a humanistic mechanism. It's like, what we want to do, if we remove God from the equation, then we can use science to gratify our own desires and our own pursuits and our own hedonistic wants. And, so what happens is now science is being used to do things that God abhors and hates. Whereas before, science was being used to glorify God. Now they're using science to turn a man into a woman, so to speak, or they're using science to change, the nature of the world in a way that God would definitely be against, and the Word of God is against. And so we are seeing that unfolding before our eyes now. This is what the result and the fruit of atheism is bringing to the scientific world, right? Because look, human innovation, while it's good, human innovation without being hinged and anchored in the knowledge of God and the will of God, it will lead to destruction and chaos and whatnot. And we've seen that. We saw that in the world wars. We saw that in the wars today. We're seeing that right now.
That's the difficult part, is because when you have an atheistic science kind of leading the way, is basically you're disconnecting morality with the natural world.
Exactly.
And the reason why we're saying that morality is not part of the natural world is because morality comes from God. That's where we get it from.
So we make that division, that distinction between the physical and the metaphysical. It's beyond the physical realm. And this is what people don't understand, is because, well, whether they understand it or they're just willingly ignorant of the fact that there are things that science cannot measure. It can't measure your love for a person. It can't measure, what's going on in your interconnection with other people. like there can be certain data that you can gather, but you can't fully measure. There's certain things that are metaphysical, and God is metaphysical. And so those arguments that one of the arguments that many atheists used to use, no longer much today, but some people do. They're like, oh well, you know, if God exists, then who created God? So you're limiting God to physical creation, or you're limiting God to the created mandate. And you're like, God is metaphysical, right? He is beyond. It's like saying who created math? Well, no one created math. They just found the order of the data in the universe that already existed, right?
Cool.
Yeah.
If you approach an atheist and you want to share the gospel, how do you normally share the gospel with them?
It's actually funny. I have pretty funny story about that, because like the majority of people are now atheists. I remember when I was this was my first public experience with an atheist, I would say, outside of school and outside of that. I was 18 and I was looking for a job, and I went with so Job Find, and they had a group of people, and we were there, and one of the guys just blurts out of nowhere, God is the biggest myth that was ever put on humanity. And everyone just like was sitting there, yeah, kind of agreeing. And then I'm like, man, am I gonna say something here? I think I should say something. And I was like, I've studied the issues. I had studied up until that point. I was 18. I'm like, you know, I don't know everything there is to know, but I'm pretty sure I can take this guy's arguments and dismantle them. Like, not to win the argument, but like so that people can actually like think critically about this issue, because it's not as straightforward as they're thinking. And I'm like, you know what, I'm going to say something. And I turned back to him. I'm like, hey man, why do you say that? Like, what's the fact and what's the evidence that you would say that God is a myth? He had nothing to say. Zero. Like there was nothing he wasn't used to someone confronting him about that view. And then I started saying, well, look, science is the measure of the physical. It's not the measure of the metaphysical. Science is not something that can measure who God is if God is transcendent and outside of creation. And he was just like, oh, well, no, I just don't believe in God. I'm like, no, you said by fact that God does not exist. You have to prove that. Like, you put the standard on Christians to say, prove God exists. Prove that he doesn't exist if you're making the argument. He's like, oh, well, all right, fine. I won't say God doesn't exist for sure, but I don't think he does. I'm like, all right, well,
it changed from an atheist to an agnostic.
So I'm like, you're an agnostic now, all right? So you push them enough. Yeah. It's like, the hard thing here is like when you're talking to any other person, like a Muslim or anyone of a different religion, you're breaking down that point. You can already get them.
Cool. I did actually notice that, like, sometimes, you know, you get a discussion with an atheist and you think like they would spend as much time as you researching this. But a lot of people is just like,
it's
look,
parroting.
I just don't believe in God kind of thing. Well, hopefully you've enjoyed it. Atheist, Christian, whatever you are, hopefully you've enjoyed it. Let us know in the comments if you know what you believe in, and if you feel like, you know, you might have disagreed with something, by all means, please share your opinions on that. And look, I mean, you don't need to go to university to have a discussion with an atheist. You can actually just go on YouTube. You can learn a lot of stuff on YouTube in regards to arguments for Christianity, what atheism use, and, you know, what's the modern science talking about these days.
Yeah.
God bless you.
God bless
Take
you
care.
guys. Take care.